No, the Pelicans aren't going to trade Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram. Let's shut that down right now. But there is a very specific reason why. And I'll tell you in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday. I'm slightly mixing it up today. We're going to do two shows, why they could look at trading Brandon Ingram, why they could look at trading Zion. That was going to be Tuesday and Wednesday. There's no need to do that because they're not trading either of those two guys. But I'll explain the specific reason why they're not going to trade either of those two guys. And that's what we'll break down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making today's episode of Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. No one else comes to you like this, the most listened to Pelican show. Subscribe. Tell a friend about the show. If you want to support the channel, become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday and comment down below on YouTube. Here's the question to you, and I'll put this and pin it down below. Are Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram untradeable in your mind? I'm kind of curious what you think. Because last week, I've got one other thing. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So last week, Friday, we talked about trading for Trae Young. And it would be in a deal likely for Brandon Ingram. And a lot of y'all don't listen to the whole show because I said they shouldn't do that. And a lot of you are like, I can't believe you're saying they should trade for Trae Young or you trade BI for Trae Young. I never said that. There's an argument to be made for it, but I never said I would do that. Anyway, when you look at this roster, this team, they're not going to trade Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram. Let's just shut that idea right now. They may listen to offers on BI this offseason, but I don't think they're going to be like actively trying to trade him. And the offers that are going to come through aren't going to be any good or anything that they particularly want. And so, thus, they're not going to trade him. And it's for a very simple reason. This team is in win now mode. This is not a rebuild. This is not acquiring assets or teardown. They're trying to win games right now. And as we talked about in that Trae Young show briefly, I don't see any team trading a better player than Brandon Ingram to the Pelicans in return for Brandon Ingram and picks. And the reverse of that is true, and we'll look at that part more in the next segment. But when you look at the Pelicans being in win now mode, they're not going to trade Brandon Ingram for a worse player. So with Koo, our Locked On Pistons host, and I have talked a good bit about Brandon Ingram and the Pistons trading for him. The problem is the Pistons aren't going to include any of their top guys in this. They're not going to include Cade Cunningham in any sort of deal for Brandon Ingram. So if you're not going to include Jaden Ivey or Cade Cunningham in there, is there anything that gets you excited? Is Killian Hayes and a bunch of picks worth it to the New Orleans Pelicans to trade for Brandon Ingram? Killian Hayes, who averaged 10.3 points per game last season, 6.2 assists, and shot 28% from three. He's young. Don't get me wrong. He's young. This will be his third year in the league going into it. That's cool. He's 21 years old. But that doesn't make you a better team right now. Those picks that you could get aren't going to do anything more because the Pelicans have other picks that they could use. They don't necessarily need a bunch more draft picks. And when you look at the youth, Brandon Ingram isn't even 26 years old. He'll be 26 next season. This dude hasn't even come close to his prime yet. And it's a guy who for the past 4 years, all of his years in New Orleans, has averaged at least 22.7 points per game. This past year, he almost averaged 25, 6, and 6 while shooting 39% from three. You're not going to trade that dude, who actually got much better on defense this year, for a worse player. So given that, it rules out a variety of trades. Same for Zion Williamson. You're trying to win games now. You've seen what you're capable of doing with Zion Williamson. You're not going to trade him for a mildly, if that, intriguing young player and a bunch of picks. And in theory, then you take those picks and you spin them into something else. Someone else who may or may not be as good as Zion Williamson is. Likely not going to be as good as Zion Williamson. So say you get Killian Hayes. You trade away Brandon Ingram. You get Killian Hayes and 2 other picks from the Pistons. And you spend 5 of those picks for Damian Lillard. This is a bad example. Or for Bradley Beal, something like that. Maybe not a guard. Maybe like some sort of wing that wants out. But there aren't tons of those. All of a sudden now you're looking at Zion, CJ, Killian Hayes. Who cares, right? And then the other player that you moved those picks for. Just keep Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, CJ, and move those picks for that guy. Simple as that. So there's just no deal that really makes sense to me of teams that are kind of selling, right? You rarely see kind of a win now trade where 2 teams that are both trying to be competitive right now trade away their best players, their second best players that they think might just fit a little bit better on the opposite squad. Usually it's a team looking to tear it apart and rebuild, and they trade whatever good player they have. It's why we've talked about Portland trading Damian Lillard. It's why I just use that as an example. Same for the Washington Wizards and Bradley Beal or Kyle Kuzma when they don't win in the next 2 years and he's under a max deal. You have those guys being like, or Luka Doncic in the Dallas Mavericks. That's a great example here, right? That's why now there's talk about maybe they should trade him. Maybe he should want out. It's usually a team that it's not working. They need to tear it down and they need to rebuild. Look at the Utah Jazz. Trading away Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert for a ton of picks that lets them have the flexibility to do whatever they want. And they also got very lucky and hit on Lauri Markkanen, who just won Most Improved Player. It's why the Oklahoma City Thunder would have no interest in trading Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They would not trade. Let's save this. I'm going to ask you a question right here. And we'll pivot to this in the next segment. Would you trade Shai, if you're the Thunder, would you trade Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to whatever team gets the number 1 pick for the right to draft Victor Wembanyama? I'll give you my answer coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans because I think it has to do with this discussion. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by, I gotta find it here, we have so many of these, is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets shouldn't be stressful. You want to get last-minute tickets to an event. You want to go to one of these playoff games. It doesn't need to be hard, and Gametime makes it easy because they have flash deals and last-minute tickets on every event, and it's super easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. You don't need to plan months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and you can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, everything. And the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. You're looking for something to do on the Friday night? Get out the Gametime app. See if you can score tickets to a concert for dirt cheap, a show you wanted to go to, try something new, have a nice date night that way. So snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Grand slams, no-hitters, double plays, the NBA playoffs. No better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And that's because right now, new customers can set up an account and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. You want to pick up a guy like Kevin Durant scoring over 25.5 points per game, you can do that there. If you want to say that finally Boston is going to put away the Atlanta Hawks, move on Tuesday night, you can take that one. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, NBA, and the official sports betting partner of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday for y'all, breaking down everything you want to know about this team. And every dayers, tomorrow on the show, I'm going to tell you why this is the most critical offseason as critical as it gets for the New Orleans Pelicans. It actually kind of ties into today's show too. That's coming up tomorrow if you are an everydayer. And by the way, for a second listen, go check out Locked On Saints. NFL Draft is this week. What are the Saints going to do? Wide receiver, defensive line, another QB. Ross Jackson breaking down everything black and gold over the Locked On Saints podcast. Trust me, this is the week, I got to take this off, that you want to listen. So let's keep talking about why this team isn't going to trade Brandon Ingram or Zion Williamson. I just went over that it's just tough to find a deal that makes sense. Usually it's a team looking to tear it apart and rebuild, and so they trade the star player to another team that wants that and is willing to give up draft picks. That's how these deals work. And we're ruling out things like signing trades in free agency when that's not really close to a similar kind of thing. With the example I just gave you, if you were the Oklahoma City Thunder, would you trade Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for the number 1 overall pick? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is unequivocally no. I get how good of a prospect Victor Wembanyama is. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I thought he could have won Most Improved. I haven't seen the voting. Did he finish second? He's going to be first or second team All-NBA. When you draft a player, you hope it's as good as that. That's one of your best case scenarios is first or second team All-NBA. When that dude's hitting that dude is good and that draft pick worked out, he's probably leading your team to wins. So the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have intriguing other guys, particularly Chet Holmgren, who's coming back next year, should be coming back next year after not playing this year. Yeah, you could trade Shai for the number 1 overall pick and pair him with Chet Holmgren, but is that guy actually going to be that good? Are there injury risks and those sorts of things? It's literally, bird in hand versus two in the bush. And you don't do that when you're trying to be competitive, when you have a good player and you're not looking to rebuild because you have other intriguing young guys. And that's essentially what the Pelicans have, right? Like that's the position that this team is in currently. So when I said they're not going to trade Brandon Ingram for a worse player, when you're looking for what they're trying to do, you're looking to bring in someone better. And who is that? Where does that make any sense? I said, I think in the Trae Young show, I don't see Boston trading Jaylen Brown for Brandon Ingram and picks because they're literally in the same position the Pelicans are. If it was the Pelicans and Pistons looking at a trade, Boston's viewing New Orleans as worse. Brandon Ingram is worse than Jaylen Brown. And they're not going to move off of the best player in the deal. And same for Zion Williamson. You're not going to trade him for Luka. Any of those people that you feel like is a blue chip prospect, I don't even think the Oklahoma City Thunder would trade Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for Zion Williamson. Straight up. Picks or no picks in there, right? Even if the Pelicans were including picks, I don't think they would do that. And that really puts the Pelicans in a position where, okay, Kevin Durant was never on the table for New Orleans at all. And so there's not really anything they can do. And there's not really many of those guys that are that level that become available. If the Lakers were to put Anthony Davis up, would you want him back? Would you include Zion in a trade for AD? Most definitely not, right? So it's just almost impossible to find a trade with one of those guys that I think makes sense that the Pelicans would do. You have David Griffin he's going into year 5 of being the head of the Pelicans, the GM of the Pelicans, and he's on the clock, right? Like his job's on the line if they don't win. My internet, I think, just died as I'm trying to record this, which that's fun. And Jimmy Butler did something good. And when you look at what his record is, if it's not great, and I'm trying to pull it up right now, and I don't know if I can, he's going to be out of a job if he doesn't start winning. So he's not going to rebuild this team. They're not going to trade one of these guys for picks and kind of reset the clock. The reason the Thunder would arguably trade Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for Wemby is to reset the clock, right? To kind of get more of their guys on the same timeline than what it might be now due to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's age, and more importantly, what his contract situation is. So when you're doing this, and again, I'm apologizing as my internet just went out, of course, as I'm trying to record the show and can't pull up some of the info that I need. How old is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? He's young. He's 24 years old. Man, he's only 1 year younger than Brandon Ingram, which is kind of crazy to think about. Tells you how young BI is. So he's 24. So you trade him for an 18-year-old. Sets you back 6 years in age. Okay, you're not good. And Sam Presti probably, if he wanted to do that, could, because there's job security. I don't think David Griffin has the same level of that. So because this team is in win now mode, and there's just no way they're going to get the best player in a deal if they're trading Zion or BI, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And any other move they can make around the edges with other things is ultimately not going to matter unless they get one thing right, because more or less, for better or worse, they're stuck with these two guys. Could be a great thing. I think both of them are good. I think they fit together. They could be really good, as we saw early on in the season. But you're stuck with them because there's no way you're going to move them given kind of the circumstances unless you trade both of them and really commit to a tear down and rebuild. That's going to take 2 or 3 years. And by then, the people making these trades aren't going to be in it, having their job anymore. So what matters then? What do you do here then? And I'll explain what that is coming up, what matters in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Before we do that, though, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. And every day of the NBA playoffs and finals, one PrizePick user will win a chance to become a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected each day, and whoever placed that entry will be given a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. You get 6 correct picks, $1 million. 5 correct picks, $80,000. 4 correct picks, $16,000. Full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at this link to be eligible for the $1 million entry. And once you opt in, all you have to do is play the game like normal, and you could be the lucky winner. And PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. You pick 2 to 6 players. They score more or less than their projections. You win up to 25 times your money on any entry, and you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. Don't forget, enter promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. No one else comes to you like this, breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans season. And on tomorrow's show, Everydayers, if you listen Monday through Friday, I'm going to break down exactly why this is the most pivotal offseason for the New Orleans Pelicans. The most important offseason for the New Orleans Pelicans. There's a lot of reasons. It ties into what we just talked about, too. That Griff's kind of on the clock a little bit. I don't think he's in danger, per se, but if this season goes a little bit sideways, the seat probably gets a little bit warm. And the best way to fix that is not trading BI for someone else who plays, not trading Zion for someone else who's more consistent in plays. It's simply keeping those two guys, specifically them, healthy. Nothing else matters. I talked about it in a show last week where we said the number one priority for the Pelicans needs to be getting Zion on the court and playing consistently. However you get that buy-in of him, his camp, his stepdad, whatever you need to do. Whatever you need to do, that is the most important thing. Same for BI, making sure he's healthy as he's missed chunks significantly of the past 2 seasons. This, as I just said, for better or worse, is who you have. Because there's no way a trade for either of those two makes any sense right now given the landscape of the NBA. So you have these two guys. You want to win games, they need to play. That means an evaluation of the organization, top to bottom, medical staff, training staff, coaching staff, front office, all of that. You can change coaches. It won't matter. I've seen people screaming for Nick Nurse, Ime Udoka, who just signed with the Houston Rockets. Man, bringing one of them isn't going to matter in. This team was first in the West with Willie Green as the head coach when they were healthy. New head coach isn't fixing that when these guys aren't playing. Bring in new players. We talked about a new starting center for the Pelicans. Ultimately, that is not an inconsequential move, but not the most consequential move. You need Zion and Brandon Ingram playing. Nothing else that they do matters unless those two guys play. Unless you somehow bring in like a 4th star to pair with CJ, Zion, and BI, but you probably would have to at least ship out CJ in a trade where you're using those picks. And this team, let's not even mince words, is in win now mode. And they're trying to make the postseason. They're trying to get into the playoffs right now. It means getting those guys healthy, not trading them away for someone else like Trae Young or what have you, because you're going to win or lose games based off of them, because they're going to be the best players in a deal. If you make a trade, you're going to get a worse player back. That's not what the Pelicans are looking to do right now. Figure it out with their health. Keep them on the court, and this team will be good, and you don't need to worry about these other trade rumors or things like that. And no, even if one of them requests out, I doubt that they would be traded right away. So these are the two guys they have, and it comes down to keeping them on the court. Availability, which is something we've been saying for a while now. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Thank you all so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Thank you for making Locked On Pelicans part of your day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. To the everydayers, I appreciate you being here. And we'll be back tomorrow to talk about why this is the most pivotal offseason for the Pelicans.